Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and let's talk about that Assassin's Creed Odyssey. According to a translated interview on Ubisoft's official German YouTube channel, the narrative director has said that the complete story part of Assassin's Creed Odyssey will take players around 100 hours to complete. Now, I had played this game at E3 2018 and it quickly moved up onto my list of most anticipated titles of 2018 when it came to the fall season. However, upon hearing this news, I thought it was nothing short of completely ridiculous, for both better and worse. I'm going to get into all of that today. We're going to talk about how this could be possible, why it's happening, and some of my thoughts as we go along. For starters, I want to look at prior RPGs that are often discussed by the gaming community for the sake of comparison to Assassin's Creed Odyssey's story being 100 hours long. My source for this information will be howlongtobeat.com. Pretty much anyone doesn't have to sign up, but can submit times on how long it took to complete titles based off certain sections, whether you're a completionist, how long you did to do some of the main stuff and some extra side content, or if you just straight shot the main story. So while it's not incredibly reliable, it's a good way to gauge game length, if anything. I want to begin with Fallout 4, which according to howlongtobeat.com, its main story takes about 26 hours. If you're doing some main and side stuff, it's about 77.5, and a completionist takes about 152, which I found accurate because for me, my first ever playthrough of Fallout 4 to completion, doing all the areas, all the side quests, and the main story did take 150. An even more prominent RPG from 2015 is The Witcher 3, which according to howlongtobeat.com takes people 49 hours to complete the main story. If you're doing main and extras, it's about 102. If you're a completionist, 169. I sat around the 130 range when I had completed my first ever playthrough of The Witcher 3. Now this one may seem a little out of place and I understand why, but I wanted to use a game from 2018 that was considerably long. That game being Octopath Traveler, which I had just finally completed with the extra end dungeon, and that took me on the nose 70 hours, which fits pretty much right into what How Long to Beat says, where if you do the main story, it's about 56.5 hours, which I have no idea how that's possible, since there is so much grinding and leveling up required. Main and extras are 72.5 hours, and then a completionist takes 96.5 hours. And of course, we couldn't complete all these comparisons without taking a look at the most recent Assassin's Creed game, which dropped fall of last year, Assassin's Creed Origins. Assassin's Creed Origins main story takes 27.5 hours to complete, main and extras 47 hours, and a completionist will finish this game in about 78 hours. Now, when I had reviewed this game, I stopped around the 45 to 50 hour range, so once again, I find all this information accurate, and if you noticed one thing, none of them said that the main story took 100 hours to complete. In fact, the only game that I can think of that took me over 100 hours to complete the main story was Persona 5, which is an entirely story-driven JRPG. Yes, there is side content in your day-to-day life, but even when completing said side content, the days are progressing, which forces the player to opt into the main story at some point in time. Even though Persona 5 is arguably one of, if not my favorite PS4 game next to Nier Automata, when I completed it at 132 hours, I was ready to move on. When you look at Ubisoft, they have improved gradually each year with their releases, but their writing has never been a strong suit. And when you look at Assassin's Creed Odyssey potentially having a 100-hour story, that's where I say it gets ridiculous, because it could end up being a lot of fluff. Now, how is this possible? How are they doing a 100-hour complete story? Assassin's Creed Odyssey very much changes up the formula compared to other AC games. This title definitely takes a lot of inspiration from The Witcher 3, based off the cutscenes, the dialogue choices, the way it all unravels in front of you. It's very reminiscent of The Witcher, which is a good thing because that's a great place to take inspiration from, but it also reminds me of what happened with Skyrim, where every game was trying to imitate Skyrim instead of trying to create their own unique thing. However, since this is a role-playing game and there is supposed to be this focus on choice and consequence, my thought is that when they say the words complete story part, you do have the choice of two different protagonists, and then throughout the story there are choices that are going to apparently have impact on the overall narrative. If that is the case, then perhaps they are accounting for all choices all consequences, both characters as well. For me, then it would make sense. We had a discussion about this on the Ham Radio podcast, and Carrick had pointed out one thing I had forgotten about Assassin's Creed Origins, which is that there were level gates in that game where you couldn't take on certain story missions until you were a certain level. So there is also that to account for, where yes, the main story may take you 100 hours, but that's probably because you're going to have to run off and do 5 hours worth of side missions to level up for the next main story mission, which then also worries me about pacing. Pacing is ever so crucial in games because, for example, you can have a title like We Happy Few, which I thought the story was actually very interesting and gripping at times, but because the pacing was so bad, it destroyed what could have been a really grand experience. Since Assassin's Creed Odyssey does have a similar framework to Origins, I imagine that there will be level gates yet again. Another way this could be possible is because in prior Assassin's Creed games, like any Ubisoft games, they had the, I call it, dramatic flair in their cutscenes. By this I mean that there was that sizzle, the changing camera angles, the action-packed stuff, as if Michael Bay was directing some of them. Or it could be something like Far Cry 5, where it feels like the first-person camera is actually just a cameraman walking around like this, getting in people's faces, and really breaking some of the disbelief that the game could bring. Whereas in Odyssey, there is a ginormous difference. Facial animations have clearly been dumbed down for the scope of the game and the amount of conversations you're going to be having. Data has been allocated to different parts of this game, where perhaps the story length can be padded out a lot longer because there isn't this focus on these grand cutscenes, these very expensive projects that take up a lot of the game, and instead it's just a back and forth conversation system for 90% of the dialogue in the title. You may not have known, but Assassin's Creed is actually taking a break in 2019, which could actually aid the argument that this title really is having a 100-hour story. Perhaps they're putting all their chips on the table and saying, we're going all in on Odyssey, we want this to be our big Assassin's Creed game, and next year we'll focus on other titles and support them. But for now, this is the big Assassin's Creed game. Which is strange because they took a year off before Origins, they got Origins out, they're doing Odyssey the following year, and so everyone thought they're back to their annualized ways, but now they're taking another year off. So perhaps they've invested so much in this project, they want to see how the Assassin's Creed license performs financially with consumers and where they'll go from there. So like I said, perhaps this 100-hour complete story going all in on Odyssey is what Ubisoft wanted to do in order to hopefully bring Assassin's Creed to a new level. Although it's strangely not much of an Assassin's game, so if a lot of new players come in, they're going to be introduced to a totally different style of game, and thus the series will fully lose its identity when they start making follow-ups to Odyssey. Now, I was doing some research on the most recent gameplay coming out at Gamescom 2018, and I had noticed one thing is that they mentioned a level 50 cap. Now, I had played the game at E3, and leveling up was not this dragged out experience. In fact, XP came at a pretty quick pace. So if that's the case, then before the story even completes, am I capped out for a while? Because 50 is a low cap for what is a complete 100-hour story part. Now that I've gathered together all the information I could fling your way, here are my thoughts generally. I think this is a little bit of hyperbolic marketing. I think Assassin's Creed Odyssey will be a much longer game, and I think it's going to offer more replayability than prior Assassin's Creed titles. I'm still gonna play it, I'm still stoked as hell for it, albeit a little intimidated because I am reviewing it, but I imagine when you compile the level gates, trying to get to the next story parts, replayability, all the additional content that's been put into the game, different places of data being allocated where we've dialed back some of the dramatic cutscenes and dumbed down facial animations for more dialogue, more choice, more consequence, and thus possibly more replayability. But we know Ubisoft at this point, like they want you to play their game, they're gonna say stuff to get hype built up for their title. And as we do wrap up this conversation, I want to edit in one last blurb that I'm not hating on Ubisoft for being very ambitious. I love what they're doing, and I think it shows great self-awareness that they have decided to put Assassin's Creed on hold after this year. It shows that the company dearly cares about the IP in a way where they do not want consumer fatigue with it. Of course, there are other financial benefits because they have Siege bringing them a lot of money, they have The Division 2 coming out next year. There are little perks to that. but it does give the IP a chance to breathe and then in turn resonate with gamers. But I'd love to hear from you, ladies and gentlemen. Are you excited for Assassin's Creed Odyssey? Does hearing that a complete story being 100 hours long bring you in or push you away? Because I know sometimes for me, depending on my schedule, especially in a very busy fall period for gaming, I have to really pick and choose what I want to play. And 100+ hour title sometimes is too big of a commitment where even if I'm really jazzed for a title, I back off because I go, I think I'm going to buy this and probably not finish it. So I'm looking to hear from you guys. What do you think about this? Fire away in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that as it fuels all the content we create here. Stay sexy, stay active, I love you all. Peace.